All right, so I want to address the question about using Breve or the short guard in response to, making sure you have the point in line. There was a very clear, succinct response regarding what guard to stand in. That's a long point, and that using Pflug for consuming energy, and that Breve should be point forward too. So that's a clear, concise, correct answer. But part of what I do is have the full historical context as best as I can. And I want to point out where there's interpretation. Let me put it this way. Debatable interpretation versus consensus of interpretation. So Fiore, there are 4 known manuscripts that exist, and they all have their differences. One of the biggest differences is the art. So the one piece of art. It's Italian for flower of battle. It's called MS Ludwig 1513. This is the catalog number. It's in a private collection. It's been with a family. It was thought to be lost in World War One, but it's been in a family's private collection. You can't really get access to it. There are facsimile scans in the early 20th century, so like 1909 or something. I do know someone that has gotten access to high quality scans, but he's not able to share them with the public. It's for his own use. I don't know the story about how he got access, but I was actually able to see them in person. But the point is that this one is the only one that shows the point not necessarily online. The other versions, which are Trattato della Scherma, which means a treatise on fencing, that's at the Morgan Library in New York City. We have Flower of Battle, which is the Getty. It's at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And then the most recently discovered was a version of Fiore, Flower of Battle, in Latin, and it resides in Paris. So it also has the best looking art, some would say. It's not necessarily the most accurate to what's in the text, but 3 of the 4 sources show Breve with the point forward. Going down that rabbit hole, we can see that looking at the shortened stance or Breve is that it says a couple things that I want to point out here. Stable. What that means is Fiore breaks guards down into stable, unstable, or fluid, or powerful. Stable means you can hang out there. Okay. Powerful means it's a guard that you launch powerful attacks from, and there are downsides to that. And then unstable is a transition that you don't stay in for various reasons. However, Fiore specifically notes that this guard is more effective in armor than without. And that's a key feature of Fiore, is that while he has sections on two-handed swords, he doesn't separate them in the same way that Liechtenauer does. So Fiore will say this is better in armor, this works better out of armor. In this case, Fiore is basically recommending do this in armor. Why might that be? Right? What is the number one flaw of Fiore's long guard or Liechtenauer's long point is that while you create a threat, your hands are exposed. Liechtenauer solves that with plow or Pflug, where you move your hands off to the side. Fiore is not moving his hands off to the side in the illustrations, but if you're wearing armor, your hands around the sword and gauntlets are safe. So that's an example of why. And that's also why in Fiore that long point or long guard is unstable or fluid. You're not supposed to hang out there for a long time. So moving on, I want to address some other things, specifically looking at plow, right? Plow is specifically, again, this is exactly what the text says. It is a translation, not an interpretation. So you do stand with the pommel below you on your hip, and that the point stands against the face. And that's plow on both sides. So it's specifically telling you that, and that's a picture of it. Again, artwork's not the best here, but they are showing the crossed hands and that your hands are safely out of the way while presenting a threat. All right, so long point in this case, is also listed as speaking window, or in the medieval German Sprechfenster. And I just kind of want to mention that here, that it's considered the best ward with the sword, but it kind of falls outside of the paradigm of Liechtenauer's four guards. While the four guards are Vomtag, Albert, Pflug, and Ox, there's also speaking window, Sprechfenster, long point, and there's also the hanging guards, which we call them like long plow, where you're at full extension rather than at your hip. The point is still forward. That's the lower hangers. And then you have the hanging guards where you're in ox and the point drops, right? So those are also guards, but Liechtenauer's tactical framework is just that, reasoning about where your hands and your point are. So Vomtag is anything where your hands are high and your point is away from the opponent. Albert covers anything where your hands are low and your point is away from your opponent. So there are secondary guards like Iron Gate, Schrankhut, Nebenhut that are all Albert, and they just are various versions of Albert. But tactically, the things you do against those guards are the same as what you would do against Albert. We're reducing the number of decisions to make because we just say hands are low, point is low, it's Albert, deal with it regardless of what version it is. This also helps us against non-Liechtenauer fencers as well. And then, Pflug is anything where the hands are low and the point is forward, and Ox is anything where the hands are high and the point is forward. So that's kind of how we reason about guards. Fiore doesn't, that I'm aware of, doesn't necessarily have that context. Okay, so the guard position that I was addressing where the point is no longer a threat. One way to look at it is that in Fiore, he tells us, so this, I'm sharing that it shows both long point, the extended stance, long guard, does say fluid, meaning you're not supposed to hang out there forever. But there is a version of a guard that looks like what people do, and it's called crown or forehead guard or frontlet stance. And it's essentially what people are doing, right? It's meant to have the cross guard above your shoulders or below, depending on the attack, and you're basically not worrying about your point being online. But Fiore does say that it's fluid or unstable, meaning you don't hang out there. You move there in a parry, and then you immediately go to something else. And this is Fiore's recommended quick draw parry, especially useful against thrusts. So you don't stay in this guard if you take Fiore's wisdom as to what to do here. Now, Liechtenauer does have a version of this guard, and it shows up in the section related to the Shielhau, the parting hue, the splitter, the parter. And they basically say, this is what other people do. You're going to run into someone using this guard, the crown guard, and that's what a common fencer does. Here's how you defeat that. So in my interpretation, Liechtenauer is recommending you don't do this. Here's how to defeat it. And connecting the dots is that Liechtenauer's answer to this same problem of that Fiore solves with the crown by taking the point offline, Liechtenauer solves it, the same problem. His answer is the Shielhau. Now, again, Liechtenauer is separating armored and unarmored fighting. Shielhau doesn't show up as a technique recommended in armor specifically. Part of Liechtenauer is you can draw conclusions and look at principles rather than techniques if you look at the system as a whole. One of the things absent from Fiore is the use of the thumb, which, if you're building a system based entirely on being able to be used both in armor and out of armor without any context switching, it would make sense that you probably don't have the full mobility of your thumb to do more complicated grips, right? If you look at historical armor, yes, there's thumb mobility, but it's nowhere near the mobility you have if you're not wearing a gauntlet. So in this case, Liechtenauer makes use of the thumb grip, and therefore the Shielhau solves the problem that Fiore solved with the crown in a better way, that it is a single tempo attack that is also a parry. So Fiore is saying parry, then riposte. Liechtenauer is saying do them both in one movement. So that's a difference, but again, they are separated by a little bit of time, as well as potentially different contexts. Many people will say that Fiore prepares you for fighting at the barriers and also honor duels. Specifically, other people will say that Liechtenauer, we don't know the context, and other people, their interpretation is that Liechtenauer prepares you for any type of sword combat that you could encounter, be it self-defense, be it fighting in the barriers, be it an illegal honor duel, be it a Fechschul, a competition in that time period. But because it's principles based, that all of it applies. It's just like modern martial arts in that regard, and in my interpretation, in that um, you can learn self-defense techniques and taking out of the equation how people respond to an actual threat differently with adrenaline and sometimes freezing, perfectly valid response. But you train the principles so that you have the muscle memory to do the thing in multiple contexts. You can do it for sport, you can do it for self-defense, a bunch of different contexts. Hopefully that kind of clarifies. I realize it took me over 11 minutes to give the context of use long point, back up a little bit, and if you need to conserve energy, use Pflug, right? Breve is point forward too. But again, long point, according to Fiore, is not something you want to hang out in too long. Instead, pick a different guard. And then Liechtenauer, you're not really supposed to hang out in long point either. And then Pflug is how you would keep your hands safe and conserve your energy. All right, so I know that's a lot of information to take in, but if you have any other questions, let me know.